Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Just before we go live into the interview here, I will spend just the next 30 seconds describing how the interview will work. I will just go through some questions I have here with our esteemed guest, and then once we get towards the end of those questions, I will verbally announce when it is time for you, the viewer, to start typing out your viewer questions, which I will read out live. So without further ado, thank you for joining me. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, respective of where you're watching from in the world. My name is Mark Allard-Will, and I'll be your host today. But as you can see, I'm not alone. I'm joined all the way from Alberta by Shea Proulx. Shea is a comic book artist and illustrator. Shea, could I ask you to introduce yourself and your work for viewers not familiar with you, please?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a Calgary-based artist from Canada, and I do narrative art that I often sort of show to people at in comics circles. And right now I've got a kids book out, but my work is always sequential, so the visuals always link up with each other page by page, and then there'll be sort of a current of information to follow the theme of each book. And this one is an ABC book for little kids called ABC Monstrosity.
Awesome, thank you so much. And so when we talk about your work as an illustrator, how did you begin? How did you begin that process of getting into this as a career?
So I went to art school in BC. I went to Emily Carr, and I didn't take bookmaking until I was in my third year. And when I started doing that, I had a project where I learned how to make a book myself, and the paper in it was really thin. And I started a project where I would just do a scribble and then turn the page and trace that and turn the page and just sort of keep this kind of animation process going. And I just love that way of working. I hadn't done that before because I always worked in pages with really thick paper. And so I started using moleskin sketchbooks where I could always have that semi-transparency and see through the page. And as I filled up book after book after book, I began to lean more and more to developing stories that could just sort of tell themselves to work in that process. Yeah, so I've been doing it for about 15 years.
Oh, fantastic. And how do you go from that into developing a style that lends itself so well to children's books and to comic books?
So I had a 2-year-old when I was starting this book, and I was spending so much time in the library and looking at kids' books, and it just occurred to me that I could use the process that I was so comfortable in to create something that would be really fun for kids to look at and adults and to share. So that became my motivation, and just having that structure of A plus B is something, plus C is something else. It really lent itself well to the way that I was already working. So I worked in this little moleskin, and the way that process works is I always go straight to ink with no rough drafts. So sort of any little quirks or mistakes are just part of the creative process. And it's a way of working that really lets you just activate every idea and sort of let it all just kind of come through as you go. It sort of feels like improv in a way. And then it all goes into the publishing process. So all the little ideas and mistakes and tiny quirks are all there. And then adding color is something I did after making a coloring book version, when coloring books were really popular in 2015. So I colored my own book and did the same sort of thing by hand in color, where if this one's the original, so it's really been worn well, and I'd take a texture that I created and try to blend that same texture in with all the ones that came before by hand. Yeah, no rough drafts.
That's fantastic. So when we talk about publishing, it's a pretty tough industry to get into, especially for illustrated books, whether that's children's books or comic books. how did that process look for you of approaching publishers, and what was your story for success?
So I really felt sort of heartbroken when the coloring book trends really hit in 2015, because I had all of these books that were full of line drawings, and I'd been approaching publishers and sort of just been rejected, but I hadn't done markets or festivals or Comic-Cons. I was just sort of sending out letters and then getting back nothing usually. And then my friends convinced me that I did have the skills to go into self-publishing. And so I really worked hard to work with a local printer and to have a lot of people kind of really on the ground assisting me so that I could just do it myself. And then once I had these books to share and printed, then I started doing conventions, and I started meeting people and networking. And that's how I met Alexander Fimbo at Renegade, and a lot of other amazing people that I just can't imagine my life without the comics community now. It's been really supportive. So yeah, I just had to sort of dive in to get started. But it was fun.
Fantastic. And touching on that answer there, it's been a tough year for publishers, of course, as it has for every industry with COVID-19. And Renegade Arts Entertainment, who you discussed there, who is your publisher and also my publisher, they have transitioned really well. Because I remember last year we debuted our books together at the TCAF, Toronto Comic Arts Festival 2019. And so with losing all of the conventions and losing all of that, there's obviously lots of sales that are lost. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Kickstarter for your book and how that acts as a transition for virtual conventions for Renegade Arts Entertainment?
Yeah, I love to talk about that. We're on day 6, and it's 50% funded right now. It's a 20-day campaign. And the hardcover, the soft cover are available through the Kickstarter. And there's packages that include the coloring book version, that include my last book with Renegade called Alice at Nap Time, and lots of other rewards. But the minimum reward for that is just with a $5 backing, and that gets you access to a virtual convention. So we're trying to kind of build up the sense of community again, and give people the ability to sort of talk and ask questions about publishing, and really kind of get that that feeling that you've maybe been missing if you were somebody that used to attend the big conventions. I think there will still be a real hit to publishing because of comic book stores sort of having difficulty bringing in a lot of things when people haven't been able to go in and pick stuff up, or just have felt weird about that. There's been hiccups with distribution, but the books are going to hit stores, and all really people have to do if they want to get the book in store is to just go in and ask for it to be brought in. But the Kickstarter is meant to sort of give a boost to the sense of there still being an event, a rallying point for people to kind of build up energy around particular projects. So, and I've really felt that in running the campaign. That energy from my friends and my family has been just really a great substitute for the kinds of launches and events that I would be scheduling otherwise. So I think the transition's been really good, really strong.
That's fantastic. So viewers who go over to the Kickstarter, they can look forward to essentially being able to ask you questions as they would live at a comic book convention. Yeah, it's sort of an exclusive event that we're trying to schedule right after we hopefully, and I think we will, hit our funding goal. So that's just with a $5 donation, and then that virtual convention access comes with every reward after that as well. But I'm really excited just about the engagement that I've had just sort of during the Kickstarter as people share it around and post it. I've been trying to sort of tap in and engage and thank people too. So even without the virtual part of it, just the energy around
around having my friends support the project has been really, really positive. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we'll just backpedal just a little bit to talk about your previous book in
Sure.
2019, which
Oh, thanks.
is Alice at Nap Time. That debuted at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival in 2019. And it's a book about early motherhood, but I was wondering if you could give us more of an insight into what the book is about and the creation process of that book, please.
So when I finished ABC Monstrosity, I've actually sort of done things all out of order a little bit in terms of publishing, because Alice at Nap Time, I knew I wanted to spend a long time adding color to it. It just felt like a project that needed to be in color, and so I didn't do this coloring book version that I did with Alice in the Womb and ABC Monstrosity. So Alice at Nap Time, in terms of when I drew it, came between those two. And I had a new baby, and I just couldn't really see where I was going to find that time to draw until she started napping regularly. And then I realized that if I just used nap time to draw, that I would always have some time in my day where that was what I was going to be doing, even if it was sort of short sometimes. And she would fall asleep in her stroller. She never slept in a crib, so she was either in a car seat or in the stroller, or sometimes even bouncing on a boat or something. And so wherever she slept, that would be where I would stay, and I would draw her. Sometimes she fell asleep in the woods, because we would go on these long walks in the woods. We were living on Salt Spring. And I didn't really have a lot of ideas about how I would finish off my books or publish them at the time. I thought somebody would kind of do that for me. And then when she was 4 months old, I got engaged and started planning a wedding with her dad. And that's when I started doing my own design on the invitations and working with my images in a way that set them up for print. And so that was kind of the beginning of getting those printing skills together. And from then on, finishing the project, adding color, doing it all, it was a long process. So took me years and years to get the book all ready, and it was really, really wonderful to see the reaction, and to also just sort of put myself back in the place that I was in when I was making it, when my art world was really just shrunken into this little period of time in my life. And there's almost no way to really put your mind back there unless you're in it. And so I have this document from this really busy sort of, but also slow time, where my connection to myself as an artist was this really tenuous thing. And you can just see it in the book as I sort of tell the story of what I was making. And then I also use the same process where every image blends into the next. So every moment of her nap is it's not just one moment, it would be sort of traced and repeated.
Can I just get you to hold that up to about head height, just so we can, so it's just,
sure.
There you go.
Yeah, so if she moved, then I would just stop and draw her from the other angle. And when I added something new, I would add that to the drawing that came next. So sometimes I might get a chance to fill up the whole page if she really stayed still for a long time. And then if I got a chance to draw, or I finished my drawing, I might start tracing things and adding them together. So it's done in the same way as the moleskin, with no rough drafts, all straight to ink. Any little imperfection just sort of stays with it. And gets published in the finished draft. And then I used color as a key, so that every time I colored something that I saw in person, I used similar colors to what I remembered. And then if I traced something from that moment, I would use that same color. So you get kind of this key to how time unfolds in the book. And then the dialogue is just sort of a dreamy, just contemplation of that kind of time. And it's all done in sort of the style of a book. So I've had really young kids just really glory in being able to read a long book and read every page. sort of even to me, right? I've had kids read my whole book to me at a table, and then for adults, it becomes this more emotional journey because they have just a different experience of the work. So sometimes it makes adults cry, but not kids, because for kids, it's just hitting them on a different level. Yeah. So I like that about the work, that it has these two different lives with different age groups.
That's fantastic. It is a beautiful book and this really beautiful time capsule of early motherhood. And for you, the viewer watching, if you do wish to buy a copy of Alice at Naptime, the second link in the description of this live video is a link where you can purchase it directly from the publisher, Renegade Arts Entertainment. So let's talk a little bit more about ABC Monstrosity, which you're currently kickstarting.
Sure. Yeah.
So you spoke a little bit about the premise of the book. Can you give us a bit more of an in-depth insight into what it's about?
Absolutely. This one's pretty easy because A is for apple. Oh. And B is for banapple. B is for banana and banapple. And then it carries forward that way. So as you go, see if I can get a page turn. As you go, everything gets added together. And then there's also a glossary in the book where I provided definitions for all of the real things and all the made-up things, but the made-up things are sort of goofy and nonsensical, and the real things wind up being almost surreal because the world is strange and science is bizarre. So it gives you a sense of the oddness of all the things that we take kind of for granted. And I drew the things that were really just around me because when I was drawing this, I was pregnant and had a little girl in tow, and so I would just kind of go, okay, I could get a mango from the store. And so there's lots of foods and lots of animals that I drew from toys, and a lot of things that were just kind of with us at the time, or that I thought seemed like fun things for kids. Like I really like the X-ray, and I like the rocket ship, because I think those are just things that kind of activate the imagination. So those were the kinds of choices that I made for this. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So the main premise, if I've got that right, is that as we progress, you experiment with just combining the words together, so we get these monstrosities. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, the words combine, the images combine, and then with the addition of color now, all the colors kind of they do the same thing as in Alice at Naptime, where every time something is traced, it keeps its color and its texture. So there is this sort of color key to the origins of different parts of the drawings. If you go back, you can go backwards and forwards through the pages and see a different story for every detail. So it's got kind of a rich life, I guess, within the images. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so everyone who's watching this, I would just like you to know that there is a link to the Kickstarter that is currently running for ABC Monstrosity in the description of this live video. There's just under 14 days left, so please do go and support it. It's wonderful work from a wonderful creator. So viewers, please begin typing out your viewer questions now, if you have any, and I will read them out live to Shea. But while you're typing those out, Shea, my final question is this, and this is something that I ask to everybody. What advice would you give to newcomers to illustration or to comic books looking to break into the industry for themselves?
I guess I would say that it's just really, really good to have a community, that when you're doing your work and you're keeping it to yourself, and if you're just if you're just sort of sending things out and waiting sort of for permission to be involved, that can feel really isolating, and that I think is what kind of breaks people sometimes. So just go out and find your people, find events to go to when we're allowed to have them in person, and while we're allowed to kind of just do them online, get involved in those communities, because supporting the people that you're in the community with and getting that support back, even if even if your career sort of never launches to superstar, take over your, day job kind of level, that's the part where happiness really kind of comes from sharing it and from getting that work out there and finding an audience for it and realizing that you might be the biggest fan of something that so few people know about because it's happening within your community. That's just really satisfying work. So you'll meet people, you'll meet publishers, you might make it big or you might not, but when you have that base, then you have a satisfying creative life. So that's my big advice.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
And if you're looking for that, Panel 1 is a really great starting place. I'm on the board for the festival in Calgary, and it's got sort of a Canada-wide membership. If you're Canadian, that's a good thing to check out.
Yeah, that is a fantastic show, one that I'm also a member of. And it's wonderful that we in Canada have those comic book art and illustrator festivals that promote the creator. So yeah, it's a really wonderful thing. It looks like we don't have any questions today, which I assume can only mean that we've answered everyone's questions through the interview. So thank you so much, Shea. This has been a real privilege to get to interview you today. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. This has been a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Like, share, subscribe.